Welcome back to the Metaphysics Series. This is a series where you and I explore some visuals that I've been given by beings looking like this. And in this video, we are going to speak about time. Here on Earth, we perceive time to be linear. We perceive there to be a past, present, and future, and that they happen after each other. The past leads to the present, and the present, leads to the future. But in this video, we are going to expand our way on thinking about time. And to do so, we are going to look at the core teaching of Ashua and start with this giant glowing orb that represents all that is. We could say that this orb, it doesn't only represent all that is, but also everything that's ever been, and maybe even everything that ever will be as well. And just as we in our previous video painted many mini orbs within this giant glowing orb, as are we gonna do this time. Here we have many mini orbs, and each orb represents a soul. A soul being an expression of God. And just as we did in the first episode of the series, we are now gonna find you and your soul. So we find your soul, we press on your soul, and as we do, we again dive into your soul. And when we do, we get you and your soul here as a giant glowing orb. And again, we can divide your soul into many mini orbs. Here, now, every orb represents an expression of your soul. Some people would say that the giant orb is an oversoul, and that every mini orb is a soul. I like to call the oversoul a soul, and the mini orbs a soul. But that might be confusing, so I like to say the soul and oversoul, and the expressions of a soul. And now, every expression of your soul gets its own reality, which we could kind of translate to every expression of you, every soul of your oversoul gets its own life. And now we are again gonna find your life, the life you're living here and right now. But this time we are not gonna dive into it straight ahead. What we are gonna do instead is that I want you to close your eyes right now. And I want you to start to daydream about a vacation. A vacation anywhere in the world. A vacation anywhere in the galaxy. Where are you? And what are you doing? What happens? Thank you. That's enough. We can now open our eyes. I want us to imagine that just as you can close your eyes and start to daydream about an experience, as is your soul closing its eyes, going within itself, diving within itself, to get to experience your life. If we would like, we could even pretend there to be a black hole in the center of every life. A black hole combined with a white hole, so that the consciousness is being wrapped up and drawn in to the black hole. It goes within itself and comes out here on Earth. I like to portray the soul and body connection in the following way. We use what we here on Ashua call the projection perspective. The projection perspective It's really us using a metaphor of a movie theater for us to better understand what we are speaking of. And I want us to imagine that whenever a soul decides to have a life, it's pretty much the same as when we watch a movie in the movie theater. In a movie theater, we have the movie projector. In this case, the movie projector represents your soul and consciousness. And in the movie theater, where does the movie play out? On the physical screen, right? And where do our lives play out? In our physical reality, in our physical body, right? So the physical screen represents our physical body and reality. And between the projector and the screen, we have a light stream. Only this time, we are not going to think about this light stream linear like this. We are going to play with the idea that the projection comes from every angle, that we have cameras all the way around us. Now we paint it on the sides, on the top and the bottom, but I want you to imagine it in the front, in the back, and diagonals as well. And now, what did the movie projector represent? Our soul and consciousness. So now we have our soul and consciousness all the way around us. And we again, just as in the previous video, find our physical body within our own consciousness. Just as we are able to daydream about something, our soul closes its eyes, goes within to come out. So the projection is not really happening from outside. It comes from within and creates an electromagnetic field around us. We are now going to speak about the movie role, like the movie frames that are being projected from the movie projector. For a movie to play, we want a fractal of a second, the next fractal of a second, the next fractal of a second, the next fractal of a second. So for me to do this, we want this, and when we scroll through them fast, we get the movie. The movie is a frame, a frame, a frame, a frame, and combined it becomes a video. If we now zoom out again, we have your oversoul and the life that you live right now. We're simply just gonna press it, but instead of just drawing your physical body this time, we are once again gonna divide this orb that represents your expression for this lifetime. And now every mini orb represents every fractal of a second that you get to experience in this lifetime. There's supposed to be many more orbs here. I just paint fewer because it's easier for me to paint. We could say that every orb represents a frame. A frame. Alright? So for the movie to play, we want our consciousness to jump from frame to frame to frame. I want us to imagine that when the soul dives into itself, it gets to the middle. We could now pretend that either your consciousness will project itself like a spiral. From the first second, next second or fractal of a second, third, fourth, fifth. So when you get out here, you might be 100 years old. Or maybe we could play with the idea that it is the electromagnetic field that kind of absorbs the movie roll. Is that what it's called? So that you have every second moving through you. Instead of you having the perception of moving frame, the frames move through you. Let's have this very discussion but from a more dimensional perspective. When we speak about dimensions here on Earth, the way we portray them visually is that we start, at least today, with the first dimension. The first dimension we can draw as a line, straight like this, like time, past, present, and future. We perceive time in itself to be a line, one dimension. To get to the second dimension, we want a line in another direction. So we have one line plus one line. We now have two dimensions. Every line I draw like this is still the first dimension. And every line I draw like this is another first dimension in itself. But when we put them together, they form a second dimension. And now, to get to the third dimension, we draw a line in another direction. Here we had width, height, and now we add depth. And if we follow the corner of the square and draw this very line from every corner and then connect it with a square in the back, we now have the third dimension. It's one dimension plus one dimension plus one dimension. Together, they become the third dimension. So just as there exist many one-dimensional lines in a square, as do many two-dimensional squares exist within a cube. And now to get to the fourth dimension, what we want to do is that we want to double this cube. So we double it and then we draw lines again. And when the cubes are connected, we get the fourth dimension. And just as we have many squares in the third dimension, as do we find many cubes in the fourth dimension. And when we look at our physical reality, we perceive it to be three-dimensional. So we could, if we want to, say that every cube represents a fractal of a second of your life. We could say that the cube all over there, it is a physical three-dimensional reality of the second you were born. And way over here, we have your last second of this very lifetime. And in the middle, we find you, right here and right now. We perceive ourselves to live in a three-dimensional reality. That is how we perceive our reality visually. But because we mentally have one more dimension in mind, the dimension of time, the linear dimension of time, past, present, and future, we add that dimension to our three-dimensional reality. Now, we could say that we're not only living in a three-dimensional reality, but in a fourth-dimensional reality as well. But this tesseract is not really this linear. We could instead draw it like this, with a little cube in the middle. This is you as a baby. And then we have a larger cube that represents, well, you as a old person. And this cube expands to the next second, the next second, the next second, and 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 the next second. So what we could do now is go back to, well, the beloved orbs. And we could say that instead of the soul moving in a spiral, maybe it's going from the center and expanding outwards. Maybe. I think for us to get at least one more perception of time, we could look at this whole dimension thing in another way. In a more, maybe, metaphysical way. Because what dimensions really is measurement. Dimensions are a measurement. And what I like to do sometimes when I speak about dimensions is that I like to again go with this giant glowing orb. So again, here we have all that is God, Source, the Creator, that is the Creator, but also space holder of all that is. Everything exists within here. It is the unit of one. Everything that exists is truly one. Many people like to say that this white glowing orb, God, Source, the Creator, the universe, is a force of pure love. But I think many people would kinda disagree. Because if this force only is love, then how could there be war? War exists. We know that hate exists. We know that darkness exists. We know that light exists, happiness, generosity. We know that many feelings, states of being, catastrophes and blessings exists. We know that there is we could say a very interesting scale of love, if now we are going to say that everything is love. So I like for us to play a little right now. And I want you to imagine yourself being a white glowing orb. And I want you to imagine that you believe that you are only love, just floating around. Even though the cosmos would be inside of you, we're now going to pretend to make it a little bit more fun. So, we imagine ourselves being a white glowing orb out in the cosmos, and when we do, I want us, you and me, right here and right now, acknowledge that if this force has the potential to create everything that is, just look at everything that exists right now. Every invention, every soul, every human, every animal, every plant, every interaction, every relationship. And remember, this is not connected to the present, also the past and the future. Imagine every war existing within here, every blessing, every beautiful moment as well. Imagine everything existing within here, not just on Earth, but other galaxies as well. If you were a white glowing orb, pretty delusional of only being love and light, and you could feel all that potential inside of you. Imagine that this is from the beginning, before anything was created. Imagine you being a white glowing orb, knowing that you have a potential larger than life, or you have the potential of life. I don't know about you, but if I was a white glowing orb and I could feel so much potential inside of me, one day I would explode, or maybe implode, maybe into a big bang. But I don't really see it as a big bang, or maybe it could be a big bang, but I rather see this as the splitting of cells. So what I want us to do is imagine this white glowing orb feeling its vast potential inside of itself. And this orb wants to explore it. I want us to imagine this white glowing orb having arms. And imagine that this orb uses its arms to try to reach all this potential inside of itself, pretend that this orb reaches inside its own tummy and pulls out the shadows, the aspects of itself that has not been seen yet. Now we have the unit of 2. We started off with the unit of 1, everything being 1. The measurement of 1, the first dimension. And now we got 2, the measurement of 2. We now have the second dimension. In this case, the light and the shadow, the yin and the yang. And even though we are now gonna portray them like this separately, I want us to remember that everything that exists is within all that is. So they really exist within the white glowing orb. Maybe this looks familiar, but we are gonna portray it as 2 separate orbs for fun. So now what the light aspect wants to do is explore this dark shadow aspect. And when the white glowing orb observes the shadow, we could say that eventually time and space collapse and they form, now we're gonna say, a 3-dimensional reality. And the reality that Source finds is grief. But Source can feel that there is more than just grief inside itself. It knows there is more. So now we imagine Source reaching out its hand and starts to spin the dark aspect, so that we now have another aspect of time and space collapsing into a new 3-dimensional reality, this time anger. We spin frustration. We spin the next emotion. Spin, next emotion, spin, next emotion. I want us to think of time as being the movement. We go from one reality to the next, to the next, to the next. From one movie frame to the next, to the next, to the next. And maybe it could be Source's own curiosity, Source's own desire to live, explore, and expand that makes the universe spin. Because remember, all of this happens within Source. So what if everything is just Source trying to see and find all aspects of itself? What if time is Source curiosity to explore itself? Maybe what I like to think about is that when we go back to the cubes and the tesseract, who says that we should stop with the 4th dimension? What if there's more to it? What if it's not only the past leading to the future, but what if there's multiple versions of a lifetime playing out simultaneously? What if we could add many 4th dimensions on top of each other? Or if we go into the tesseract, that the minicube is not only expanding, but that the minicube can choose to could choose and shift angle a little bit. Could go right, left, up, or down. Well, that leads us into the discussion of timelines.